Started. Thank you again for joining us today for PAVE's weekly virtual panel. My name is Tara Andringa, and I'm PAVE's Executive Director. Our virtual panel today is looking at a new poll that we all just put out and looking at how public attitudes on autonomous vehicles have changed. PAVE and MIT and JD Power have all independently conducted surveys in the past looking at public attitudes and knowledge. This year, we decided to combine efforts, and in one consolidated survey, nationwide survey that's called the JD Power 2021 Mobility Confidence Index. And so for our panel today, we wanted to talk to two of the authors behind the survey and talk about their findings. So with that, I'd love to introduce our guests. Lisa Boor, who's the Senior Manager of Global Automotive at JD Power. Lisa, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Chaiwoo Lee, who's a research scientist at MIT's AgeLab. Chaiwoo, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And we will go ahead and get started. First of all, just wanted to start really big picture. And Lisa, I'll direct the first question to you. How did this pairing of these three organizations come together?
Well, it really is a collaboration between these three organizations. JD Power has been the voice of the consumer for more than 50 years. And we've been making sure that we provide some metrics that are helpful and continue to provide that consumer's voice to the industry. And at the same time, MIT's AVT Consortium is this group and this organization of many industry leaders who conducts research independently and ensures that data-driven information is helping to move the technology further in the industry. And so it really was a natural alignment. JD Power is a member of the MIT AVT Consortium. And when we looked at two of our studies that we were conducting independently, it was an easy thing to marry the elements from the best of both of these studies. And then the addition of PAVE to that, to our collaboration, it just makes it even better because we know that education is a key element to this story. And so to have PAVE join and align with us on this endeavor was perfect.
And I will say from PAVE's perspective, we were beyond honored to be invited to join these two incredible organizations. Chaiwoo, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit more about the history of the poll. I know MIT has been working on this for a long time. Can you just speak a little bit about the history and how that has evolved?
Yeah, so doing research around automotive technologies and in-vehicle technologies, we were realizing that there are many benefits that are promised with vehicle automation, but user perspectives, consumer experience, and adoption and acceptance were not really being understood. So in 2016, as part of AVT, we started this project to do large-scale surveys to better understand how people view vehicle automation and how acceptance may differ across consumers of different characteristics, mainly thinking about different age groups as we're placed within the MIT AgeLab, where we do research around understanding perceptions and experiences across consumer segments, focusing in on older adults and families and effects across generations. So we set out to do this survey in 2016, and then we continued it for 5 years until 2020 annually. And we asked large groups of people, current drivers, about their comfort with different levels of automation, willingness to use self-driving, knowledge and awareness of vehicle automation, and how these all related to demographic and experiential characteristics. And JD Power and we both realized that there's a lot of overlap in what we were asking and what we were interested in. And there could be some great synergies, and combining our efforts with PAVE also, some great synergies around having a more representative data, being able to speak better on what's really happening on consumers' minds and getting that out to people who are able to take this research and make meaningful changes.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'm curious we'll get into more about sort of the changes you've seen over the years. But Lisa, I first really want to start really high level in terms of the takeaways. What would you say are the kind of biggest takeaways or themes that you saw from the results of the poll?
Well, the foundation of the survey itself is our index model for consumer readiness, and it measures readiness for fully automated self-driving vehicles as it's applied in multiple mobility functions. So we look at it for both personal vehicles as well as commercial applications, public transportation, to gauge that consumer readiness. So the good news is that, as far as our metric goes, we're seeing movement in a positive direction. Previously, our index is measured on a 100-point scale, and previously we were sort of in that low level of consumer readiness, and we're seeing the increases are small, but we're seeing it moving into this neutral zone. And so the good news is that we're moving in the right direction. But at the same time, one of our key findings in this year's survey is that there are some misperceptions and misunderstandings within our consumer comprehension of what a fully automated self-driving vehicle is. One of the primary questions in the survey asks consumers to select the correct definition of what a fully automated self-driving vehicle is, and they're given 7 options, which are based on SAE definitions of levels of automation. And the majority of consumers are not correctly answering the question. And as we look at it deeper, we see that those consumers who are self-reporting being very knowledgeable about automated vehicles, they're actually less likely to answer that question correctly. So one of the big findings from this year is we're seeing this gap in between actual and perceived knowledge.
Absolutely.
And to add to Lisa's point a little bit, looking at knowledge of self-driving, we explored that question in 2019 and 2020 as well. And what we saw over 3 years is that the accuracy of public definition of self-driving is actually not improving. So it's not going the direction that we would like to see it go. So in 2019, we actually saw a slight majority of people selecting the correct options, but that kept decreasing. And in 2021, we're at the lowest numbers.
And does the survey offer any kinds of suggestions for what the cause of that would be? Or is that not something that?
Yeah, I don't know if we have anything specifically speaking to the reasons from this year's survey. In the past years, we've asked indirectly, really, if there's anything that's happened in the recent past that affected their perceptions or their understanding of self-driving, their feelings towards self-driving and automation. And a lot of people talked about some things that they saw in the media. And this year also, when we asked people to describe what they know as self-driving, what they experience as self-driving, people were giving examples that weren't actually self-driving as SAE definitions would describe.
Right.
To add to that, we see, in these examples that we ask consumers to provide, we did that in an open format so that we're capturing top of mind ideas and as opposed to pre-populating a response table. And it's interesting to see that, the majority of respondents, when asked what comes to mind, we're seeing a lot of mentions of Tesla. And that doesn't include sentiment. So they're both positive and negative comments, right. But that is frequently being mentioned. And so the fact that brand is being associated with a fully automated self-driving vehicle, which we know they do not have in the marketplace yet, is very telling itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, related to this, I'm curious I'd be curious how both you would answer this. What were the biggest surprises in the poll or survey? Anything that, was really different than you expected or big leap from past years? Chaiwoo, anything that leaps out?
I would say not I feel like the biggest surprise was in the knowledge piece. And also another analysis that we ran at MIT was to look at how different factors contributed to the overall acceptance. And we saw that what really mattered was the self-rated and self-perceived knowledge rather than the actual objective knowledge. So that was one thing that surprised me. And one thing that was not too surprising, but I would like to note is that when we asked about the maximum level of automation that people are comfortable with, and we asked that question over 6 years, starting from 2016, continuing on to this year. And we don't necessarily see that people are increasingly comfortable with fully automated self-driving vehicles, but we see that people are increasingly comfortable with some level of assistance in driving their cars. So some level of automated assistive features, different ADAS features. It's not that they are staying away from self-driving cars and automation altogether, but there's kind of this bounded acceptance of the level of automation that they're okay with.
Absolutely.
I have something just to add to that. Along those same lines, we talk about this gap in knowledge, and I hypothesized before we started that consumers who have current ADAS features on their vehicle would possibly be more likely to accurately define a self-driving vehicle because they have these more driver assist features on their vehicles right now. And in fact, we didn't see that in the data. They were not more accurate. And so that was something that was quite surprising to us, at least from our perspective.
Absolutely. I also want to bring up we got some fantastic questions from individuals from the audience as they registered. And so a couple of the questions that we received are actually really relevant to this point. And what I wanted to ask, Chaiwoo, you can respond to this if you'd like to. Someone asked if there was a difference in sentiment between autonomous passenger vehicles versus autonomous Class 8 trucks and other types of freight delivery vehicles. Did you see any differences there in the survey results?
Yeah, and Lisa can probably add to this too, but we didn't ask it directly, so not in this format that was asked in the question, but we asked about people's level of comfort and willingness to accept fully automated self-driving vehicles in different contexts and different scenarios. And one of that was passenger vehicles, and one of that was for transport of goods. And we had a few additional scenarios related to that. And we did see that people were more accepting of using fully automated self-driving vehicles for transporting goods rather than people.
Yeah, Lisa, anything to add to that?
Yes, it's interesting because, when we looked at the level of consumer readiness in each of these applications, the consumer or the commercial application has some of that highest scoring, as opposed to private ownership of a fully automated self-driving vehicle. And then we also saw those seeing value in the application for those who are unable to drive due to injury or age. So those are sort of the highest scoring areas for consumer readiness.
Okay, yeah, and then actually one of the other questions we got from the audience is very similar to that. They asked if there was a specific focus with people with disabilities or other mobility issues. Was there anything?
So yeah, we did not focus specifically on those who are unable to drive due to a disability or injury. However, the sample is nationally representative. And one of the questions we ask is, do you have a current driver's license and drive? Do you have a driver's license but you don't drive? Are you unable to drive due to injury or handicap? And so we did ask this question to understand what the consumer's perspective is. And so 90% of our sample are consumers who have a driver's license and drive. The other 5% is split. And there are, it's small sample, but there is a percentage of our respondents who are unable to drive and do not have a license.
Right.
Yeah, and to the current drivers, we asked people this year, as well as in past years of the MIT survey, about their willingness to use a self-driving car, and also willingness to use a self-driving car if they were no longer able to drive due to age, injury, or other conditions. So while this isn't directly focusing on people who currently experience mobility limitations, what we saw from this year's data and past data is that people do see the value in fully autonomous self-driving vehicles being offered and used as a solution to improve mobility access for people of all abilities, because what we saw is that acceptance really grew a lot when that scenario was added. So people were unsure about using self-driving cars themselves right now, but if the scenario around inability to drive was added, people were far more accepting.
Interesting. Right. That's fascinating. And then Lisa, another question from the audience is someone asked, what are the factors that contribute most to influencing public perception of AVs? Is that something that the survey looked at?
Well, we know that consumer experience matters, and understanding where consumers are, their starting point. So current experience with lower levels of automation are definitely helping to form the foundation for future higher levels of automation. And we're seeing, again, we talk about this level of inaccuracy, and one of the things that we ask consumers to tell us is, how far out do you believe these fully automated self-driving applications will be available? And there is this gap again, where we have 19% saying that they are currently available for purchase or lease. So one of the things that we're seeing is this incorrect information again, that we need to work together as an industry in order to correct and close those gaps.
Adding to Lisa's point about current experiences forming future perceptions, we also saw when we asked about different ADAS use and different aspects of use. So we asked about frequency of use, how they felt about using different ADAS. And what we saw was that how they felt about using current systems that they have and how positively they felt about them, that was a more significant and stronger predictor than how frequently they engaged with the systems. So it really, to say, I think quality matters more than quantity in this case.
Oh, interesting. And then is it accurate that then people who had more exposure to ADAS were more likely to be positively inclined about future levels of higher levels of technology too? Is that a?
Yeah, so exposure and currently using ADAS did predict higher levels of acceptance, but not really the higher frequency of using.
Right, that makes sense.
And to add to that, we did see, though, we asked this level, a question of what level of automation are you most comfortable with? And those consumers who do have ADAS features on their vehicle are reporting higher levels of comfort with higher levels of automation. So that is something to note.
Interesting. And Lisa, you kind of touched on this earlier, but obviously PAVE's focus is education. And so the results certainly showed the need for education, and your example about people who could not accurately identify what a self-driving or fully self-driving car is. Were there other topics that really show, a need for really educating consumers?
So one of the elements that we look at is we ask consumers to tell us how they prefer to learn how to properly operate a fully automated self-driving vehicle. Now, we know that, we really don't know what constitutes proper operation of a fully automated self-driving vehicle at this point in time. But when you're asking the consumers to answer this question, most of them are saying that some sort of specialized driver's education class or course is their preference. And that's good news, because they're very willing to accept this sort of education and additional resources. Other things that they say are very traditional learning methods. So, that dealer explanation, training videos, and of course the owner's manual, which, we all sort of joke amongst ourselves that that's great for people who may consult it and actually find what they're looking for. So that's always a tricky one.
Right. Yeah, honestly, that was one of the things that I thought was the most surprising. The poll was the number of people who were eager to do more driver education. I found that surprising. Chaiwoo, I'm curious. You have experience looking at the long history of survey numbers. Were there other things that you thought were significant shifts this time around?
Not so much significant shifts, but it was interesting to see how the overall comfort level kind of goes up and down over the years. And for some years, we were able to tie decrease in acceptance to some recent events that happened. So for example, I think in 2019, our survey happened to be at the same time as when the Uber crash in Arizona happened. So that was interesting to see how that might have shaped some of the findings, but also seeing how over the course of survey, even in that year, how current events might affect people's perceptions, and also looking at some of the open-ended responses around how experiences may and perceptions may carry over between domains. So I think we also had, I think in 2019 or 20, we had people mentioning the Boeing crashes as something that affected their thoughts on automation and self-driving. And also looking at some of our past regression models and what affects people's acceptance, and seeing how people's general level of technology use and experience and adoption across different domains, not limited to transportation and automotive. And that actually is a significant predictor of how people feel about self-driving. So, and looking at how that holds across the years was also interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. We just got a question that I think
I was just going to say
early on that I think is an important thing. Someone's asking about the sample, and I really think that that's a really fair thing to level set with. And kind of how it's compared to the past. Lisa, do you want to just talk about who was included in the sample and how that may differ from previous times?
Sure. So the sample we utilize a nationally representative panel sample. And we completed 4,000 surveys. The work was done in June and July of this year. And the consumer panel is comprised of vehicle owners ages 18 and older. And so our work at JD Power has been, we always utilize a nationally representative sample. In our previous research, MCI research, we did the same. But this was one of those improvements to expand on MIT's previous research, which had some geographical limitations. And so it's great to be able to compare the data sets in that regard.
Yeah, and the comparison actually rendered to some new insights around how different consumer characteristics may contribute to overall acceptance, because in past years, MIT's sample, and we had in 2016 just under 3,000 people, and in 2020 over 4,000 people. So we had a fairly large sample, but this was a convenient sample. So we had challenges in terms of the representativeness of the sample, and this was generally skewed toward older adults, higher income and higher education, and overrepresented the East Coast region. So it was really great to see comparing that with the more representative national representative sample to see what some of the differences might be.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thanks for that clarification. And then one other question that came in is asking about the training question, Lisa, about driver.
That's the one I thought you were going to ask about. Sorry. So the question is, if the vehicle is self-driving, a level 4 or level 5, why would the driver need training? And so we know that, these classifications for level 4 and level 5 mean that the vehicle systems would perform all of the driving tasks, right? And the driver would not need to take control at any time. But there is this realization that in order to be a passenger or in this vehicle, some level of knowledge and understanding of what the system is capable of and what to expect is an important part of ensuring consumer satisfaction and their acceptance of the technology.
Yeah, and another point I would add to that is based on our research here at the AgeLab, looking across different technology domains where automation is happening, such as the smart home, for example, we see that even if tasks are being automated, there's still consumers wanting to know what's going on and still have the sense of control. So maybe the need to be educated through different methods is a reflection of that too. And I think we lost Tara.
I think so.
Hi, everybody. This is Tabitha with PAVE. I'm just going to pop in here as a unidentified head until we get Tara back in. But yes, thank you, Chaiwoo, and thank you, Lisa, obviously, for these answers. I guess as we're kind of getting towards wrapping up the our panel series, just wondering, I know we've talked a little bit about, what some of the most exciting findings were, what surprised you, but I'd love to hear just sort of looking forward to you guys about what you'd like to see in the year ahead coming out of these results. And when you think about the future and the next steps, what gets you excited about this topic?
Well, from my perspective, we at JD Power, being able to provide a voice to the consumer and a metric that can be used to measure readiness and to provide industry leaders guidance. That's something that excites us, and to be able to further this conversation with all of the various aspects of this ecosystem is very important to us. And we know that, PAVE always says, no one can do it alone and it takes a village. And there's no question that without, all industry stakeholders discussing these issues, that we will not be able to ensure the success of the technology and that consumers accept it and carry it through. So these are all very critical conversations that we look forward to having, with everyone moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for us to first to get a continuous picture and pulse of how consumers are thinking about vehicle automation as we move into the future, and thinking more broadly about what affects acceptance and what forms people's perceptions and attitudes. I think there's a really interesting relationship here, maybe many relationships and interconnections happening here around consumer characteristics, both in demographics, technological experiences, and the baseline attitudes, and thinking about current experiences with ADAS, the level of knowledge, both as objective, measured knowledge versus self-rated, and how these all contribute to acceptance in the future, and what the relationships really are. So really trying to build a framework around this, I think would be our next goal. And coming from a technology adoption research angle, there are plenty of models out there around technology adoption and acceptance in different domains, but I think this is a great opportunity to use this data to rebuild a framework for a more automated, a future system.
Great, and I apologize for disappearing there. My computer, it's not 2021 without some computer problems. So my entire computer just went black. Perfect timing, but yes, thank you for for sticking with us. I apologize for that. Again, it sounds like Tabitha might have kind of covered is trying to look at the future, and wanted to think about, looking at the results that you see from this. Are there questions you would ask in the next round, or anything else that you would change going forward? Or did you, maybe you covered that completely?
We haven't discussed any survey redesign questions yet.
And I guess what I'm worried about is, when you look at the results, where there are other questions that came up in your mind, like, oh, I really would love to dig into that more. Anything that no, it was a perfectly fine answer.
I think the main thing from our perspective is continuing to use this foundation to measure change. And we know that each experience brings to a consumer brings something different. And so understanding that interaction and how year over year, or as we continue to measure this, and as we continue to see new levels of automation enter the marketplace, what impact is each of those things having? And it's this year we saw these small deployments of automation in shuttles and the neuro and these things. Consumers are acknowledging those things, and they know that they exist, and they're bringing that to light. And so being able to continue to see that is very important moving forward.
Yeah, and I would, and I'm not sure what the right way to ask these would be, but maybe questions to add around what contributes to the knowledge gaps. And again, I'm not sure what these questions might look like, but something to gauge the causes around where we're seeing the gaps and why we're seeing the gaps.
Absolutely. And we are actually at 2:30. I feel like these sessions always go way too fast. But thank you both, Chaiwoo Lee and Lisa Boor, for joining us today for a great conversation about this survey. And again, PAVE was just absolutely honored and delighted to join your organizations in this effort. And to all of our guests, thank you for joining us today and all year. This is unfortunately the last panel of the year for PAVE. We're going to take a little break at the end of the year, but thank you for joining us all year. And we have a great lineup started for January. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. And you can watch recordings of all of our chats on either our YouTube channel or on our website at pavecampaign.org. But thank you to Chaiwoo and Lisa for joining us today. And thank you all. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.